At first glance, if you woke up to news this morning of Israel's attack upon Iran, you may have thought that Benjamin Netanyahu had elected to ignore international calls for restraint. And yet, as the dust settled, both metaphorical and actual, it became clear that perhaps he had this Goldilocks option, not too hot, not too cold. And you start processing that thought, and the Iranian authorities' official state media in Iran, which is essentially a mouthpiece for the Ayatollahs, confirming or at least claiming that the damage has been minimal, that so far as we know, no lives have been lost, and the ordnance deployed was not particularly apocalyptic. So you've got an attack upon Israel, which hurt nobody. I beg your pardon, as a critically ill young Bedouin girl and others critically injured. But if you think about the scale of the carnage in Gaza or the horror of the October the 7th terror attack upon Israel, then, a death toll of 0 is, at first glance, a thing to celebrate. And at second glance, a thing to celebrate. 2 death tolls. But then, and forgive me if this is a strange way to approach this scenario, and then you just look at the madness of it all. I mean, what an absolutely absurd scenario. We might as well be back in the 12th century with trebuchets and catapults. The purposes that are being served by these twin attacks, have you any idea what they are? Well, we've got to show that we're tough. We've got to show that we won't put up with it. We can't not respond because that will... I mean, it's the politics of the playground. I wouldn't say that, I don't think, if people had been killed in their droves in this twin exchange, because it would feel so inappropriate. But my goodness me, what a weird... I say species nearly. What a weird world we are. 2 things have happened that I thought we should talk about. The first is the retaliatory strikes after weeks of escalating tensions. US officials say Israel hit Iran with a missile overnight on Friday, competing claims about the scale of the attack on the Isfahan region, but the consensus seems to be, with the Iranian state media downplaying its significance, the consensus seems to be that if Netanyahu was going to do something, this is about the best that people could have hoped for. I beg your pardon, I'm sure there are people in Israel and beyond who wish he had gone further. So let me say instead, this is the best that those of us who mourn every death equally, whether it's a Palestinian child, an Iranian child, an Israeli child, a Muslim child, or a Jewish child, this is probably the best we could have hoped for if Netanyahu had to do something. Okay? How do you describe it? Andrew has already been in touch to call it face-saving stone throwing. And that applies equally to both of them, doesn't it? It's such a strange state of affairs that genuine fears, probably the most plausible or credible fears of a World War III type scenario, has been delivered by 2 regimes that are currently engaged in what I think can be loosely described as face-saving stone throwing or face-saving missile launching. It sits alongside another story that I think understandably is drawing a little less attention, and that is something that happened in Washington at the UN Security Council, where a draft resolution was put before members recommending that, and I quote, the state of Palestine be admitted to membership of the United Nations. Now, it's a 15-member Security Council, as you know. There were 12 votes in favour and 2 abstentions. The power of veto exercised by the US meant that the motion went nowhere. But my goodness me, it leaves America incredibly isolated now on the world stage in their support for Israel, or rather their opposition to Palestinian statehood, which is regarded as an act of support for Israel. So there's a little bit of me that wonders how, looking at that UN security resolution vote, Netanyahu has managed in the space of 6 months to segue from the sympathy of the entire, well, certainly the sympathy of the entire Western world, to actually having allies such as France vote against his express wishes. That is, I think, an interesting development, but not, of course, as important in the short term as Israel launching missiles, launching an attack on Iran. So Ivan suggests it's handbags at dawn. Well, it is, and Kathy calls it willy waving, which I think we'll allow one mention of on the programme. And it kind of is, isn't it? It's such a strange feeling this morning to be having a conversation with such enormous ramifications, but with currently no actual casualties, or at least no actual killing. It's good old-fashioned brinksmanship, says Lewis. And I think that's what we'll do today, unless you come up with a better idea. I think we'll look at what is going on. What is this? Two very, very military powers have launched attacks upon each other that journalists and diplomats have chosen to describe in fairly apocalyptic language. Well, at least the word unprecedented has been bandied around a lot. The international community has been almost unanimous in calls for Netanyahu not to retaliate, and yet there is a sense at 10:10, and it might have changed by 11 o'clock, there is a sense at 10:10 that somehow this retaliation is okay because it hasn't really achieved anything tangible. Which leads us to the question of what has it done that is intangible. I don't think, as things stand, there are any reports of crucial infrastructure having been damaged. Similarly, the 300 plus projectiles that were launched upon Israel don't seem to have sustained any meaningful infrastructural damage, with the exception of the Bedouin people living in a sort of borderline shantytown situation being injured, and please God that they're all right, that the casualty count seems to be mercifully low to non-existent if we're talking about deaths. And I have absolutely no idea what's been achieved. And yet I have a sense, because I'm not stupid, I hope, that something has. What? 0345 6060973. What has been achieved? So someone's made a lot of money. Every time a bomb goes off, every time a missile's launched, every time a drone takes to the sky, whether it gets shot down or not, there's a shareholding somewhere that ticks up. The more I've read about arms supplies in both world wars, the more my faith in humanity has diminished, but there's always a few quid being made. I don't think it's a particularly important factor in this conversation, but goodness me, it's important not to forget it. What has been achieved? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. We are sitting here worried about a World War III scenario because we have been told by everybody important to be a bit worried, at least, about a World War III scenario. We are reading reports, the like of which we haven't really read before, about Iran launching 300 plus projectiles, missiles, toward drones towards Israel, on Israel, at Israel, breaching some of their, 99.9%, over 99% of them I read yesterday have been shot down. And now Israel responds with an action that appears at first glance to be in contravention of what their allies were calling for. And they achieve about as little as Iran achieved in the first place. And the world is sort of responding, I think, with a sense of relief that Benjamin Netanyahu didn't go further, and yet what he has done since October the 7th is enough to ensure absolute isolation at the UN Security Council, save for the continuing support of Joe Biden, who has arguably been made to look a little bit of a mug by Netanyahu's refusal to respect his requests for no retaliation. So look, the simplistic question here, and occasionally it's worth asking the simplistic question, is whether or not this Goldilocks option is the least bad outcome of the current standoff. An attack that didn't really hurt anybody is a good thing. And that's the point at which I feel this is all a bit Kafkaesque. I don't know if you'd looked at it this way round before I started burbling. But, oh, great, yes, there's been a massive attack and no one got hurt. It's like something out of Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, isn't it? So what has been achieved? Nothing tangible. Normally you judge the success of a mission like this, I think, by counting the casualties, counting the enemy casualties, or counting the cost of the damage sustained. They won't be able to do this, or that airport will not be usable, or that senior military figure has been removed from the chessboard. That's how you normally calculate the success of these sort of things, and yet here we are, celebrating the. I don't want to even say failure, but the logistical fact. I mean, it can't be a failure because I don't think they were trying to do any more than what they've done. So I think that we can probably agree, and if the situation changes in the course of this morning, I will, of course, bring it to your attention and possibly change my question accordingly. But the notion of no tangible impact, no significant, measurable impact of either the Iranian attack upon Israel or the Israeli attack upon Iran, what is the intangible impact? What are the intangible effects? The unmeasurable consequences of both of these excursions? If you hit the numbers now, you will get through. Sometimes at 10 o'clock, I don't really know where we're going when we start talking. I do my best to get across the facts, and I'm grateful to you for indulging me this morning, because I really struggled with that notion of this all looking a little bit surreal. I hate stepping too far back from a story when it's a matter of life and death. I don't know who else just suddenly thought of the Tory or suspended Tory MP Mark Menzies when I used that phrase, life and death. But because the casualty count is low to non-existent overnight, and yet the significance of what has happened is dominating international news and diplomacy, it just struck me as being a moment perhaps to remark upon the strangeness of it all. And that led us, I think, helpfully towards the question of what's been achieved by both sides. What have Iran achieved and what have Israel achieved? Or rather, what have Iran and Israel achieved in the last week?